Alright, welcome back to my channel. This time around we're going to quickly dive into PHP, JavaScript and Python, which we've been looking at all along. So without much ado, let's go into our 100 days IT folder. We have subfolders grouped by environments, and as you can see, we can dive into web projects and we'll see Flask, Django and Python, JavaScript and PHP. So I'll go ahead and open everything in our Visual Studio Code editor. So remember, before we can do any of this, we need three things. We need to have a web browser, which I believe you might have. I'm using Google Chrome. You also need to have a code editor, which in this case I have Visual Studio Code that I am using. And finally, you need to have your environment set up. And from there, we should be good to go. Now, within our dev environment, we have multiple projects we're working on. We're going to focus on our web projects. Today we'll not look at Django or Flask. We're going to look at Python, JavaScript, and PHP. You see there are some examples I already have in there, but first of all, let's look at these steps. We'll start by setting up our environment, getting to python.org, installing Python, which comes with tip and other built-in tools. We're also going to go into JavaScript by way of Node.js. So we'll go to nodejs.org and install Node, the recent version. It does come with Node Package Manager. And then we'll go to php.net. PHP runs on all the different operating systems. We'll get to pick the PHP that we need for our operating system. So once we have all those environments set up, then we can now go ahead to test the environment. So let's start by going to python.org, nodejs.org, and php.net. We already have a copy of Python, but to get one, you go to download and click on the Python version, download it. Also make sure you check out the documentation, download a PDF if you need for your references. The same with Node.js. We go to nodejs.org. It's not very hard to, it's very easy to locate the download button. You click on it and you're good to go. Make sure you also check out the documentation. PHP is a little bit challenging, so it will take some time to do that. You also locate the download button and go from there. So for Node.js, we already clicked on the download button. The installation ran successfully. And here is a pop-up which we will go ahead and click on, and we should be able to be good from there. So we'll check that out later on. Now let's spend some time on PHP, which will be a little bit challenging. So go to download, locate the stable version you want. Again, there are multiple versions. You can download a compressed file of a particular type which you like. I'll probably download a zip file, and make sure you check the correct version that matches with the project you're working on. So you click on the download and check it out. Once it's done downloading, you can either open the folder where you downloaded it to or open it naturally. My downloads are going to the downloads folder. As you can see, check out the file and the folders inside. Everything looks okay. And now I can go ahead and unzip it or archive it, unpackage it, whichever way you want to call it. So once it gets unzipped, we can check out what the contents are. But before we proceed, we want to go ahead and rename that folder because we'll have to move it to another location. So renaming it, make sure you leave the version number at the end because you might have multiple versions of PHP running on the same machine, server, or operating system. So let's make a copy of that and then locate where we have our program files. Our program files are located, and from there we can go ahead and paste what we copied over. Once it's pasted, we're going to need a link, or rather the URL, the path to that location. Once we get the path, we go to our PC, check out the properties. In there, you should be able to see advanced settings. So we go to the advanced system settings and click out the environmental variables. From there, we should be able to update the environmental variables for the system, not just a particular user. so that everyone logging in should be able to use this PHP. So identify where the path is, click on the edit button to change it, and once you get into the edit environmental variables window, you can click on new, paste that URL or path. So I noticed that the path is incomplete, so I'm going to cancel this and go back, and let's go back to locate where my PHP is. So we get to it and copy the full path, including the folder where the PHP is located. So now let's redo it. We paste it and add a slash at the end. I don't trust my typing, so I wouldn't want to type this out. So it's better for me to copy and paste. Double check that everything is in there and we're good to go. We can OK ourselves out of that. So that's about it. We are all set now with PHP for Windows 10. Can close out all the different pages, but just to double check before we get out of here, let's go ahead and do a quick test. We're going to do a thorough test later on. Let's just make a quick test to make sure that everything is working fine. So we go to our command line and open it up, type cmd from Windows or terminal if you're using Mac. So for Python, you can type in Python version. It should tell us what version we're using, 3.13.1. And also for the package installer for Python, it's pip. So we check pip's version, it's 24.3.1. Now on to Node. For Node.js, we check out the version, it's version 22.12.0. And Node Package Manager version is 10.9. So good. For PHP, we just check the version is using a Zen engine, and just like that, we're good to go. Testing the environment is straightforward. Just use the version tag to check if we have Python, Node, and PHP. As a matter of fact, we can go ahead and do that in here as well. If we go ahead and say open integrated terminal, it opens up an integrated terminal for us. Let me maximize that and then collapse this. So our terminal here, we want to find out Python. What version am I using of Python? And it tells me I'm using version 3.13. Also for Node, what version am I using for Node? It tells me the version for Node. And for PHP, what version am I using for PHP? It tells me the version. I'm good. So each one of these has a package manager, the built-in tools that come with it. For Python, I need to find out what version of pip I'm using. Oops, I can't spell. And it's going to take its time, dive in and figure it out. So as you can see, while I'm running that, it's telling me out here what I'm running. So it comes back and tells me I'm using pip version 24. Also, if I want to find out what are the different tools that I have in there, I can go ahead and say pip list. And while it's running, you can see it tells me what is running there. And these are the list of packages that I have and their versions within my Python environment. Quite a lot. You could get even more as we keep writing more code and importing more stuff. So I'm going to clear the screen so that it's not looking too crowded. And just like that, I can also do the same for npm. So npm, Node Package Manager, you can check what version we have for that. Oops, we can't find any version for npm. Actually, I believe this might be because I'm in PowerShell. Let's go ahead and try this in a command line and see what happens. So Node version, what do we have? It tells us our version. How about npm version? And it tells us our version. So yeah, for PowerShell, that's usually an issue because I need to make sure for security reasons they're not going to let us run everything. So here it's telling us cannot be loaded because running scripts is disabled for that system. It's always a good idea to disable scripts. Otherwise, malicious actors can go ahead and take over your system. So we're not going to use PowerShell. I'll go back into my command line and there you go. So now that I've checked the version for npm, I can also go ahead and see npm, if I can spell correctly. Check out the list. What do I have installed so far? And it looks like I do not have anything. So in here, it's telling us just the command. So it has a list of the commands of things I can do, but the list is empty. I don't have anything set up yet. Awesome. So clear this and carry on with what we needed to do. So we've gotten our environment set up. We've tested the environments, everything looks kosher. Now we can go ahead and start writing simple applications for each one of them. Okay, so for Python, we've already looked at Flask. It's not a big deal. We'll go ahead and look at JavaScript and PHP as well. Once we're done with that, we'll go ahead and also check out a few things which are very important when it comes to coding. We need to understand the anatomy of our code. So we're going to start with Python to write a simple app, which we've done before. Check out those videos. So let's have our Explorer available. And first, to do that, we need to go into the terminal. Once we get to the terminal, let's change to that directory. I'll navigate to the directory. From there, we can check out the modules that have been installed. Flask is already installed, our lightweight framework that we need to use. So if we try installing it again, it will just tell us, hey, the requirement is already satisfied. So far so good, we're good to go. Next thing we need to do then is to just create an app.py file, Python file, and this will be our application. Since we've gotten Flask installed already, from the installed Flask, we can import the Flask with a capital F class and also proceed to create an app instance of Flask. Once that is created, we need to start off with the function that is going to be called each time we try to execute this particular file. So it returns hello world, but we also want to be able to route this particular function to give its output at a particular URL, and also modularize our application so that if we import it as a module, our application does not get to run. But if it's not imported as a module, then we can go ahead and run in debug mode. Now, once that is set, we can execute or start off this server by typing python app.py on the terminal. Once that is served up, or once that is executed, it serves up a server, which is a development server, gives us a pin since it's in debug mode. If we click on that link or follow that link or type it out, it opens up our web app in the browser. So that's about it for Python. Again, check out the full course on that. Now on to JavaScript. For JavaScript, again, we're going to start off with the terminal, but let's go ahead and use Ctrl+C to quit or kill the server for Python. Now for Node.js, we need to go ahead and create a folder where our package or our application is going to be held. So create this Node.js folder and navigate into the folder. Once we are within that folder, we need to be able to initialize it using the npm, which we downloaded earlier alongside Node.js. So npm init-y is going to initialize that folder, which just creates a package.json file, as you can see. And from here, we also need to proceed, similar to what we did with Python, to create a JavaScript file. Before we do that JavaScript file, we might need a framework. So we'll use npm once again to install a lightweight framework, which is Express. Now Express goes ahead and installs a bunch of packages to help us with streamlining the process. And we check it out, everything looks good. Don't need any changes to that. We can go ahead and just straight up create an app.js file. This app.js file, again, it's just a JavaScript file, but this time it's going to be running on the server. We create a variable that is going to hold an instance of our package that has been imported. Okay, once that has been created, we can now start an instance of that app. The app is going to actually hold everything that is for our application per se. Just for the sake of it, we might as well just have another constant to hold the value for our port number, and then we can pass that in future. So eventually we set up a route so that each time a user or anyone tries to get to our home directory, which is a /, we have a request or a response that goes to, and this arrow function is going to spit back some information to them or give them some kind of a response. So that response then is going to be whatever we type in here. In this case, we're just going to simply say hello world, and that's it. Simply put. But then we need to have our server listening for what's going to happen. And in order for us to do that, we have our server listening at that port, which we identified on line 3. And while it's listening, we can go ahead and log something on the console to let us know that, hey, everything is currently running or our server is running smoothly. So with JavaScript, that's about it as well. Similar to Python, we're going to need to execute this, and we'll go back to our command line, get out of our application, go back to our command line and fire off the Node.js application, which is in particular an Express web app. So once again, back to the command line. All we need to do is node app.js, and we should be able to launch out our server. Ask us if we're okay with that, which we are, and then we can click on the link which is going to be provided to us, or simply go ahead and type the link. So let's give it a couple seconds for it to load up, and there we go. So type it, should be on port 3000, and on there you can see port 3000 shows us the value for Node.js, while port 5000 shows up that for Python. So again, if we need to refresh it, we're going to have to stop the server. We can use other tools to make this work out for us automatically, but for now this is just a simple example, so we have to stop and restart the server, and we should be able to see those changes. All right, the same with Python, we can go ahead and make changes to our Python file to make sure that it's unique. It shows us that, hey, this is Python hello world, the other one is Node.js hello world. And once we stop and restart our server, refresh our browser, we should be able to see those changes on there. Just like that, we've been able to write a Flask web app as well as a Node.js web app. All right, so next up is PHP. PHP as well, very straightforward. We just go ahead and type in our PHP code, which, as you can see, I did type in 1 in the index.php file. And for us to use PHP, we're not going to use the web framework in this case. We're going to just use a simple PHP script, because again, PHP was built for the web and we don't need to customize anything, but to streamline the process, we're definitely going to need a script. So this is a basic example of PHP's ability to generate dynamic content. But for all of these, you have to remember there are more complex scenarios where we can interact with databases, process forms, create dynamic web pages, and so on and so forth. In addition to that, we definitely need to think about virtual environments, using those to isolate our project dependencies, as well as, what database we would like to integrate with, SQLite, PostgreSQL, MySQL, and using the appropriate libraries with them as well. Templating engines are quite important for each one of these frameworks, which generate HTML content dynamically. Finally, we definitely want to deploy this in a production environment, so we look at having either deployed in a cloud environment or other options on a local machine. As mentioned, this is just a simplistic view. We will dive into each one of these programming languages to understand their paradigms and how we can actually effect the logic that drives the backend. So again, starting with the basic structure of each code, we've seen already the different types of usage or syntax for each one of them, the basic syntax, I should say. And then we have with the common elements of our code, starting from comments, variables, data types, control flow, which has to do with conditionals, if else, as well as loops. And from there we can then go into functions. So this all tie in with the programming paradigms which we discussed earlier. If you need to be clear on that, again, check out the video on programming paradigms. It's very straightforward, down to earth, and you'll be able to understand how these are all related with Python, JavaScript, and PHP. So let's dive into some of the code, starting with our syntax for each one of them. So I can go ahead and close this, and I would expand that for each one so we can look at them side by side. Awesome. Now I can collapse that. Now I have Python, which is printing out hello Africa. I have JavaScript, which is printing out, let's make this a little smaller, there you go, which is printing out hello America. And I have PHP, which is printing out hello Asia. That's the basic syntax. Next up, we're going to dive into each one of their structure, starting from the basics all the way to object-oriented programming, and you should be able to learn how to use each one of these codes, programming languages, basically in a few minutes. Awesome.